Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight for our chat about airline accessibility. I'm really excited that you guys are all joining us. My name is Shannon, and I am the Peer Connect Coordinator for Backbones. Backbones is an organization that aims to inform and support people with spinal cord injuries and the disability community at large through conversations like these about a variety of topics, including adaptive fitness, housing, transportation, cooking and nutrition, and book chats. A few things to note before we begin our event tonight. We have closed captioning available, so if you'd like to turn that on, you can click the CC at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions during the chat, feel free to type them in the Q&A box, or if you would verbally like to ask a question, you can use the Zoom feature to raise your hand and we will unmute you. Our chat will also be recorded and posted to YouTube, so I will send you that link in case you would like to watch it later or share. We have a great panel of guests joining us tonight that have been on the front line of making air travel more accessible for people with disabilities. We have Michelle Irwin and Brady Martin joining us from All Wheels Up, an organization advocating for wheelchair accessible travel and crash testing wheelchairs for commercial flights. We also have Kenny Salvini, who is a writer, advocate, and co-founder of the Here and Now Project. And his air travel advocacy rose to the national stage after his power wheelchair was destroyed by 2 different airlines in the span of a calendar year. So he has a lot of expertise on this topic. So I'd love to turn it over to Michelle and Brady if you'd like to say a few more words about yourself and get us started with our presentation.
Sure, thank you so much, Shannon. I'm Michelle Irwin. I'm the president of All Wheels Up, and we are not just an advocacy group, we are also the first organization to fund the research for a wheelchair spot on airplanes. We're really excited about the work that we're about to share with you. And it's been a long road of 10 years, but I think we're starting to see all of the hard work coming to fruition.
Definitely. My name is Brady Martin. I am the director of advocacy at All Wheels Up. I joined, one of my best friends has spinal muscular atrophy. So speaking to him about a lot of his difficult experiences flying, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, really want to get involved, especially on the legislative advocacy side. And so we'll be speaking a little bit, have a presentation, a little bit about our advocacy efforts and really ways that you can support as well.
Awesome. And Kenny, do you want to say a few words before we begin the presentation?
Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here and for to Backbones as well as All Wheels Up for including me in this conversation. I'm a C3-4 quadriplegic of almost 18 years, and yeah, I wasn't looking for a platform. It came looking for me, but I'm glad to be a part of the conversation today. So
awesome. Thank you. Brady, the floor is yours if you want to get started.
All right, sounds good. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick here. All right. Awesome. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to first speak a little bit about All Wheels Up. We've already mentioned really the background, as Michelle spoke about, and the advocacy, our advocacy efforts right now for aircraft accessibility. As I said, I'm Brady, the director of advocacy. So this is our mission statement: to increase awareness for safer, more dignified air travel, both through research and through advocacy. So a lot of our research, we are the only organization that has crash tested wheelchair tie downs to see if a wheelchair space is feasible on aircrafts. We also collaborate with numerous universities to conduct research on the engineering and the economic feasibility of implementation. as well as working with airline personnel, the FAA, as well as with Congress with our advocacy efforts. And also, if you have any questions about any of these slides, please just note them. We're just going to answer all the questions at the end, but we want to make sure that we're able to answer those questions for you. All right, so really quick, we wanted to touch upon this because this is a really important study that was just released less than a week ago. So this is the Transportation Research Board's feasibility study of wheelchair securement system on aircrafts. Actual name of study is even longer than that, even though this is a mouthful. So really this study of if a wheelchair securement system is feasible on aircrafts came from an amendment from the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 that All Wheels Up really was the driver behind. And so this study was conducted over the past year, really looking at how feasible is creating a wheelchair space on aircrafts. And these are some of the findings. They really show that the boarding door clearances, the aisle space, the floor layout do not present physical impediments for wheelchairs. So there is space on an aircraft for wheelchairs to be able to maneuver. This would include the removal of 2 rows of seats near that left boarding front door to create sufficient space. And also the opportunity to create a standardized restraint system. So I'm sure you guys, most of you are familiar with restraint systems when you're traveling through other forms of transportation. So really looking at a standardized restraint system. It also is proven to withstand more G-force than traditional seats. So really proving that a wheelchair space is not only feasible, it can actually be safer than the seats that are currently used by other passengers. And then a few next steps, establishing an FAA research center to conduct more research. And this is something I really wanted to point out. The study really emphasized studies in the future of consumer demand. So they speak about how a lot of individuals with disabilities, they do not hear their travel experiences because a lot of individuals with disabilities are unable to travel by aircrafts. So really vocalizing, using all of your voices, really to emphasize your difficult experiences and really why you do not travel. So just some brief statistics, the issue of accessible air travel in general. This is the number of disability-related complaints in 2018. This 8% increase from the previous year. Most of these had to do, as you can see, with inadequate seating accommodation. So that ties back to that wheelchair space. And then another study through Congress recently showed that 29 wheelchairs and scooters were damaged per day in 2019. And so these are some recent incidents that went viral. I'm not sure how many of you guys are on TikTok. I'm personally not, but I still saw this, where this was a woman. There was millions of views of her having her wheelchair broken. And as she's really saying in this video, that are her legs, that's how she functions. A couple months later, her friend who actually videoed this, her wheelchair was broken. And you may be familiar with Shane from Squirmy and Grubs, the YouTube channel. His wheelchair was also broken in June of this year. Then I just want to turn it over to Kenny just to talk about his experiences traveling by air as well as his advocacy efforts.
All right, there's a train going by my house. I hope it does not interfere with the audio, but if so, I apologize. Yeah, I totally forgot to introduce the Here Now Project when we first opened it up, but we are the social support network for the paralysis community in the Pacific Northwest. And that's something I started back in 2012 after I was sitting in a circle with 7 other guys in power wheelchairs, and I heard my story told 7 different ways. And we basically had the idea that we need to get knee to knee with people that have been where we've been, and we've grown that all over Western Washington and through the Pacific Northwest ever since. And like I said in the opening, I was paralyzed in 2004 in a snow skiing accident, and for the first 12 years after my injury, I did not fly because all I heard were the horror stories of people having their chairs broken or other problems. Basically, I had people tell me, if you're going to fly, you might as well pack an extra bag of parts because your stuff's going to break. Well, I had a couple of road trips where my wheelchair had problems anyways, and I figured, well, if it's going to break on me on road trips, I might as well try flying. So in 2016, I boarded a flight to New York to go to the East Coast for United Spinal's roll on Capitol Hill. And yeah, I landed at 8 a.m. on Father's Day on a red-eye flight in Newark, New Jersey, and my wheelchair was destroyed so badly that I spent 11 of the 14 days of my trip to the East Coast without my wheelchair at all. And as a C3-4 quad, I drive this chair with my head. You know, as anybody that's got a high cervical injury will know that our wheelchairs are very specific in how they are set up. And so I think I got a hand-controlled wheelchair for the first 5 days while I was in New York City, which did me no good. I had my wife and caregiver drive me around all of New York, which was really, it was a challenge. And then when I got to Philadelphia, that wheelchair broke and I had to be in a manual wheelchair for the next 6 days. And yeah, like I said in the onset, I wasn't looking for a platform, it came looking for me. And then a year later is actually when this photo was taken. I was coming home from the same event the following year, and it was, I think it was like 362 days after my first wheelchair was broken that Alaska Airlines destroyed my chair on the way back. And you know, like this picture went mildly viral, and I always find it ironic because you can barely see my wheelchair that's actually broken. My caregiver's holding pieces of it. Most people are shocked by the aisle chair shot, which is the protocol for most of us when we're getting on chairs, and they always talk about how kind of inhumane that looks. And it's like, no, that's the part that makes things accessible, or what people want to call accessible. And yeah, it was really interesting because the second time around, I was able to get a little bit more behind the curtain with Alaska Airlines. When United broke it the first time, I was kind of that fly annoying the elephant on Twitter. There wasn't much conversation to be had, but Alaska Airlines pulled me behind the curtain, and I got to have some substantive conversations with some of their higher up folks. But then I also got introduced to Michelle and All Wheels Up through New Mobility magazine. I wrote an article called Flying the Unfriendly Skies, and yeah, really got me behind the curtain to the differences between the Air Carrier Access Act and the ADA that I think Brady's probably going to talk about here soon. But yeah, it was a fascinating education. It wasn't one I was looking for, but now to get behind the curtain and see, you know, how far we really had to go was pretty frustrating, to say the least, to be 31 years past the ADA and find out that planes are not a part of the ADA. That was pretty maddening. But then, as Michelle alluded to as well, that, you know, here we are 5 years later after that first wheelchair was damaged. You know, we've been able to see the kind of the fruits of all of this labor, that things are starting to come around, and it's pretty exciting to be a part of. So yeah, that's kind of my experience.
All right, thank you, Kenny, for that story. Like you said, of course, it's awful that you've had those two experiences, but you know, definitely your advocacy stemming from that. I think a lot of people, they share those experiences. So you know, we're happy to have your advocacy.
No, pleasure.
And now I'd like to speak a little bit about our advocacy efforts and really lead into what tangible things that you can do. As Kenny just said, there is a difference between the ADA and the ACAA. A lot of people think that air travel is covered through the ADA. That's the hallmark disability rights legislation that everyone thinks about when they think about transportation and accessibility. However, airlines, air travel was specifically excluded from the ADA. There's multiple lines that say comma, except for air travel, comma, definitely, you know, excluded. And so it's still covered through the ACAA that was passed by the Reagan administration. And there's a lot less protections through the ACAA. And so really the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act of 2021 is really what it sounds like. It's amending the ACAA so it's on the same standard as the ADA, so that air travel has the same, you have the same protections while traveling by air as you are when traveling on the ground. So here are a few things that the Amendments Act would do. First of all, it would require the Department of Transportation to refer complaints to the Department of Justice. And so to create a private right of action. So currently, if you do have a damaged wheelchair, you feel you're discriminated against, you do not currently have a private right of action. So that means to seek redress through the court system. So you have to deal with the airline customer service. So there's really no way to seek that justice through the courts, which is obviously something really important when it comes to these issues. It would also require the Department of Transportation to levy civil penalties on airlines committing these violations. So really to give them an incentive to make sure that they're treating all their passengers with respect. And also creating new accessibility standards for new aircrafts, including accessible seating accommodations, safe boarding and deplaning practices, as well as having visually accessible announcements. So I just want to provide a list of the supporting organizations. There's even more now added to this list, but just to show the broad support for this legislation as we really try to push it forward. And from All Wheels Up perspective, we do have some proposed language changes to this legislation. The implementation of a wheelchair space is a process. And as the legislation amendments mention suitable seating accommodations, it does not explicitly mention the implementation of a wheelchair space. So we're really working with Congress, those advocating for disability rights, to include a wheelchair space in that language. Because as many of you know, when they're creating accessible seating accommodations, that does not include a wheelchair space, that's really not accessible to everyone. You're not creating an air travel experience that is accessible to all passengers. And also creating an aviation research and center of excellence for wheelchair access. So we mentioned this through the TRB's report, but creating an established research center that would study wheelchair access on aircrafts. And just have a couple more slides here. This is what we envision for a wheelchair space. On the left, these are very basic images, but we do envision a traditional airplane seat that would either fold into the ground or be removed, and then having a lock-in system, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with on other forms of transportation, such as buses or cars. So this is a lock-in system, and having those wheelchair tie-downs, as I said, while removing a traditional airplane seat. Then one of the last things I want to touch on is just another effort that we're working on. Current emergency escape plans for individuals with disabilities. The last study was conducted over 40 years ago that included the interests of individuals with disabilities when it comes to emergency landing. And so really 40 years, obviously that's been a very long time. It's very outdated on aircrafts that are no longer in circulation. So that's concerning, because if airlines are really not taking into account individuals with disabilities when there is an emergency landing, then there could be lives put at risk if an individual with a disability is on an aircraft that has to make that landing. So this includes the implementation of the Adaps Sling in emergency kits. The Adaps Sling was created by a friend, Robin, who was a former flight attendant. And the Adaps Sling is basically placed under an individual with a disability on the aircraft seat to be able to easily easily transport an individual with a disability if there is an emergency landing. So this was actually used in a real emergency landing in 2018 and helped two passengers exit the smoke-filled cabin. So this is my last slide, really moving forward. Specifically with the Air Carrier Access Amendments Act. We have a legislative page on our website, as you can see, allwheelsup.org, to both advocate and also to educate you on your rights when flying. This is a QR code that will bring you to the Paralyzed Veterans of America's website that has a pre-written letter to a congressman or congresswoman. You just have to type in your zip code with any specific story. And so it's really a simple way to show, hey, as I said, they really want to hear from individuals with disabilities, hear that demand for accessible air travel. And so this is a way to do that directly. Now I know there's a few questions, probably still have some rolling in, but that's all that I have for you guys. I can leave this up for right now. So if you want to scan the QR code for later, but yeah, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about either our organization, Kenny's efforts, or advocacy efforts in general.
So I can answer that one question from Ariel, why the air travel was left out of the ADA. So actually the ACAA was written 4 years before the ADA. And so they felt, and was actually the blueprint and springboard for the ADA to be written. Congress felt that since they had already written a law specifically for air travel, that they could, they weren't feeling that they were necessarily excluding it from the ADA. They already felt that their job was done. Obviously, looking at where we are today, we know that it is far from done, and that's why we're working on the ACAA to make even more significant improvements. For example, the ADA buses and rails had 14 years to become accessible, and so that's what we're hoping we can work into the ACAA. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And we have another one in the Q&A. Christopher says, I recently had a bad experience with accessibility when flying with American Airlines. I sent a letter to AA as well as to Senator Tammy Duckworth. What else can individuals do to advocate for more accessible planes besides writing to airlines and government representatives?
I can touch on it just in to say that you need to make the report directly to the Department of Transportation. I can get that link in the chat as well, because what I found with when I wrote the article in 2018, which it's now changed quite a bit now that the airlines have to self-report, but you can also put in a formal complaint, because the difference between the self-reporting and the formal complaints that come from individuals who have had their chairs damaged is that the DOT does not require or did not require them to report it, and they were only acting on the actual formal complaints that came from users as well. And so that's kind of where we still have work to do with the ACAA Amendments Act as well. So
I can answer that Chuck's question about do all planes currently require the evacuation sling on board. So Chuck, that's a really great question. Actually, Brady has just submitted a white paper to Congress specifically asking, Congress to relook at the evacuation plan here. There is no evacuation plan if you're someone with a disability, basically. And so what we are asking Congress to do is relook at the evacuation plan and specifically add in the Adaps evacuation sling. We know that that's a long road to happen. So All Wheels Up is providing evacuation slings and the adults care harness to wheelchair users for free, so they can advocate for their own safe evacuation while we work with the airlines to take it into consideration. So you can check out our website, or you can just go to contacts@All Wheels Up and ask for an Adaps evacuation sling. And if you also need a CARES harness, you can request that as well.
And then I can speak. It looks like we have a question about the number of seats that anticipating to be made available. Currently, it would be one wheelchair space. And the reason for that is because, as I said, through the TRB study, they're looking at the removal of 1 to 2 rows of seats. That's still a lot of research going behind that. So currently advocating for just 1 seat. I'm sure Michelle wants to speak more on that about the research that is going on. But yeah, that's currently the discussion. And then it looks like we have another question from Kathy of where does the legislation stand currently? So currently the legislation has been proposed. The Air Carrier Access Amendments Act has been proposed in both the Senate and Congress. I believe that there is about 20 co-sponsors at this point. And so this legislation, we can still show our support. It's through the end of 2021. I'm actually into 2022 as well. So there is that co-sponsorship. If this legislation does not pass, then we really want to include some of these provisions in the next reauthorization act that will come around in a couple years, just like we did in the 2018 reauthorization act.
Thanks, Brady. I think I'll go to Donald's question about, do we anticipate the airlines will be fighting these accessibility standards because of the values of this that they place on the seats. So All Wheels Up has just funded a project with the University of Washington, which is a budget impact model. And what we're showing, bringing to the airlines, which they have asked of us, is showing them that they can actually save money and not look at the loss of seats as a detriment. So example, we're working on tarmac turn time efficiency studies, as well as, you know, the amount of money that they're paying for wheelchair agents who are out on disability because they had to lift someone into an airplane seat, the people who are out on disability from lifting the 400-pound wheelchairs into cargo, you know, the $4 million an airline had to spend on, you know, payout for, because they dropped somebody during a transfer, the $2.6 million that an airline would spend on wheelchairs and replacements per year. So we're culminating all of these dollars, and, you know, it's going to show overall over the course of the lifespan of a airplane what they can save versus looking at as a detriment. And then also looking at the market. You know, one wheelchair user doesn't typically travel by themselves. They also travel with their family. And so we're showing them that family who, instead of choosing to drive to their destination, they can gain that extra revenue of the, you know, 3 additional tickets. So and we also don't think the airlines are necessarily going to be fighting it. I think I'm also going to be answering Jennifer's question here. Every major airline here in the United States has attended our working groups. We've hosted at least 2 of them, and they've given, you know, a lot of, you know, help and guidance into direction. We've specifically crash tested the QLK 150, which is the center bolt lock system, like what I believe Kenny uses, based on their feedback from our first crash test that we did, that was actually using more of the manual tie down. So we've had a lot of robust conversations with the airlines, and I'm not going to say, you know, do I know if anyone's going to actually implement it, but they're showing up and having the conversations, which I think is pretty terrific.
And look like Zach and Chuck, similar question about restroom accessibility in the Amendments Act. So currently that is not a focus of the Amendments Act. That's really what they see as a beast of its own. There has been a lot of conversation when it comes to restroom accessibility with disability rights legislation in general, but with this Amendments Act specifically. You know, as we said with the wheelchair space, we really want to create more specific language in this legislation. So bathroom accessibility would be something that we want to push as well.
So, and I just want to tack on to that Brady. So there are organizations like the PVA that are taking on bathroom accessibility, and I believe, you know, single aisle airplanes have already been mandated to be have lavatories that are accessible by 2024, and double aisle airplanes are supposed to already be accessible. So I believe, though, you know, through different other organizations and other committees, the accessible lavatories is being addressed.
Yeah, I can speak to that as well. Through United Spinal Association, they actually just had a webinar this morning on a similar topic where they're touching on lavatory accessibility, because with, I think, the FAA Reauthorization Act that came through a couple of years ago, it created a Department of Transportation committee that is all geared around accessibility of the airlines. And there is one of the heads of advocacy for United Spinal is on that that panel as well. And then I can also, looks like Jacques Courtney, the question was looking at airport, are you looking at airport accessibility? Sounds like it had some issues at LaGuardia. Airlines fell under the ACAA, but airports are under the ADA themselves. So those are mandated differently than this legislation. So technically they should be, those complaints should be able to go straight to the Department of Justice rather than getting lost and filtered to the DOT.
I think I can answer Emily's question. If you are a manual wheelchair user, would you have to use the wheelchair securement system, or could you have the option to transfer to an airline seat? There is no mandate that just because there's going to be now a wheelchair spot on airplanes that you know, and you're a wheelchair user, that you have to, you know, now use that seat. You definitely will have the flexibility of making that choice. So if you're more comfortable and want to be in an airline seat, you definitely can still do that. And that is outlined in the TRB report as well. And that is, All Wheels Up did suggest that as well in our presentation to the TRB.
Right. And then I can jump to Kathy's question. Can more be done about breakage? Court action is fine, but doesn't provide immediate help to get a chair fixed. What I've learned to do in the meantime to help get my chair through with the minimal damage possible is I've learned to break it down, fold the seat back down, because the problem we've discovered is it's the cargo bay door that is too short for most power wheelchairs. And so what I've done is I've taken bolts out of my seat back and folded them forward. Yeah, and so the best prevention, or I guess the best way to avoid it is try to prevent having them damaged. But yeah, with having the ability with that private right of action, though, is hopefully going to help deter a little bit of that right now.
And we also, I just want to mention on our website, I believe this is being posted soon, but there are wheelchair handling forms through multiple airlines, Delta, I believe also Southwest, where you can fill in information about your wheelchair, what you know, what not to touch on it, what type of battery. So a lot of these wheelchair handling forms you can fill out and lay on your wheelchair, tape it on, and they could give a lot more information about specifically your wheelchair and the needs, you know, how it needs to be treated.
I can answer the question from Donald. His question is, are you considering adding shoulder restraints in airplanes? My brother has a disability, and in addition to his power wheelchair seat belt, he uses a shoulder restraint in our van. So Donald, we are working with OEMs, which is original equipment manufacturers. They're the seating manufacturers and the Boeings and Airbuses of the world. And that is definitely the conversation we're having with them, that there will probably be an additional shoulder restraint system for wheelchair users. We're still in R&D. There's no solid answers out there, but that is right now what it's looking like. Yes.
And then is there going to be more training required for airline personnel who are interacting with people with disabilities and helping them get on and off the plane? Will there be more training required to make the transitions easier and more effective?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I got hired by an organization called Open Doors, who does a lot of those trainings. I got to sit in on a baggage training one time, and it does leave a lot to be desired there. It is an uphill battle to try to educate folks, because like Brady was mentioning, I think that there are an infinite amount of wheelchairs, so it's hard for them to be experts at every single one. But yeah, they are constantly trying to do education for the folks that are doing the loading themselves.
And there's another question. Will there be enough room for the chair and any extra space for, such as for legroom, footrests for very tall people?
I think Kenny and I can both answer this. We've done some mock-up studies, and I think with removing, I believe it's the 2 rows and the turn time studies or the floor space studies that we've done, it looks like there will be enough room. You have to understand, like, the TRB study was just approved. There's still a lot more work that needs to be done, a lot more research, a lot of studies. But these are all great questions because this is everything that we're looking into.
There was a good point on here about the disability market for airlines, and if airlines are fully accessible, then the airlines would actually be able to grow their businesses as more wheelchair users would be able to travel by air. This is a great point. This is one that we really emphasize to airlines, that in the long run there would be more more customers, more demand. So we are partnering with some universities to look at economic feasibility, really the long-term economic, the benefits to these airlines. And really that has to do with demand, expressing your demand to be, as an individual with a disability, to travel by air, and how that really could shape the market for these airlines.
I think it's Jack. Jack has a question. Attendants, the people who take you out of the aircraft, so the wheelchair agents at AA and LaGuardia, are they AA employees? I believe that's the question. And what governs issues with incompetent attendance? Is that in the ADA? I would say, one, it's a really tricky slope, and it's interesting. So wheelchair agents typically are third party. So they're a third party agent that typically the airlines hire out. And so that's where you will probably end up into a lot of spin with a lot of, with organizations pointing fingers. I believe that wheelchair agents, if they are in the airport themselves, you would fall under the ADA. And then once you're sitting in the airplane, and if you're still within the wheelchair agent and you are lifted and there is an issue during your lift, then that you would fall under the ACAA. So it really depends on where you are in your travel.
And then someone asked about how other countries are dealing with making their airlines and airports more accessible.
I would, All Wheels Up is working around the world. We had chapters in Canada, Australia, and we were trying to make headway there in regards to wanting to implement the same thing in regards to, say, the ACAA over there. It's a little slow going, but we have writing campaigns in Canada that have been really successful. I know the UK had just passed, I think, a new law, I think maybe 2 years ago now, working towards improving their accessible air travel. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure about every country. The United States I would say, is the best at it, and every other country is trying to work at or emulate the United States. I do hear some countries are better than others. For example, Japan, I hear, is amazing. But then other countries like France, I heard, are dismal. So you would have to do your research. And if you are looking to book a trip, there are wheelchair users who specialize in that specifically, like Corey Lee. And he gives a lot of great tips and tricks on traveling to destinations and where best to go.
It looks like there was a question that I must have missed from a while ago, but speaking about how not all people with disabilities require the maximum level of accommodation. It looks like the individuals who really only need armrests that can be raised to allow for easy transfer. So this is actually something that is in the Amendments Act when they're talking about more suitable seating accommodations. They do specifically mention movable armrests. So that is something that is included, looking at, you know, that broad range. Individuals with disabilities obviously need different, levels of accommodation. So that is part of the Amendments Act, is those movable armrests.
And I would also just want to add, like you said, not all accommodations are the same. So I know, we're here to talk about, a reduced mobility, but since 1977, it was suggested by the FAA that Braille was added to the evacuation cards that we find in the back of the airplane seats, and that still has not been added. And so All Wheels Up brings that up as just an easy, low-hanging fruit fix for the disability community, because that can get added to, Braille could get added to those cards pretty easily. So there's a lot of work to be done for accommodations across the board, whether it's reduced mobilities or other disabilities.
Lots of great questions so far.
It looks like there is another question. As a power wheelchair user based in London, has lived in the US for 10 plus years. Are we working with international organizations, airlines, manufacturers to ensure that wheelchair users are able to have accessible air travel? So specifically with this legislation, the Amendments Act, that is just through related to flights to and from the United States. So that does include foreign airline or airlines that are, if it is a trip between the US and a foreign country. So as long as the US is part of that that air travel, then these laws would apply. But as it is legislation through Congress, it only have to do with those trips through the US.
And I'll jump in just to expand upon that, Brady. So just to let you know, IATA has come to our working groups. They are aware of the work that we are doing. We do work with companies from all over the world. So Airbus, I believe, is a German company. So we work with Boeing as well. So we work with everybody who wants to be a part of the solution for accessible air travel. So we've actually met. We flew to the UK. We've presented to Virgin Atlantic. We're at one of their conferences. And Virgin Atlantic has attended our multiple working groups as well. So that's why we have been trying to open up chapters all over the world, because we do agree with you that air travel is global, and we want to make sure that people from all over the world have the same opportunities that may be provided in the United States, such as a wheelchair spot on airplanes.
I guess I could touch on one of the other questions that was a little further back, that we were talking about what else can you do? And I just encourage you to, get active in these kind of legislative things, but then also connect with, local chapters of whatever association might apply to you, like United Spinal or the Spina Bifida associations, any of the advocacy networks that are in your backyard, because they'll help you amplify your voices. And if it wasn't for United Spinal, it would, being kind of tracking my blog as I was live blogging my horrendous experience, it would have just been another one of those 15,000 wheelchairs that they got damaged, but they actually took it upon themselves as an organization to elevate the platform as well. So.
And then there's a question that says, currently, is it correct the only way to fly is by transferring into an airplane seat and checking your chair, whether it is manual or power?
I can say yes, if you are like everyday Joe, just like all of us here, yes, that's typically what you can do. I do know a gentleman who works for the UN, and we've used his pictures in our slides for presentations to prove that a wheelchair spot is possible. He flies on C-130s in his wheelchair, tied down with military cargo ties. We had a board member who was evacuated from a hurricane the same exact way. And we have heard that, I'm going to forget the person's name, but he's a congressperson who uses a wheelchair. And under the the Obama administration, he did fly on Air Force One in his wheelchair. So we do know that there are exceptions, but it is not for most people. So, and that's what we are working to do. We are looking to make commercial travel accessible for everybody. And, I know, again, just springboarding off of what Kenny was saying in regards to ways you can help. So, we are a grassroots nonprofit, and we not just advocate for improvement for accessible air travel, we fund the research. So we funded the first crash tests that were done in 2016. We crash tested again in 2018. And currently we have 3 major projects currently underway with 2 different universities, specifically aligned for air travel. We also have projects with other universities, such as Duke universities, with physiatrists, looking at why doctors should support patients staying in their wheelchairs. We have a morbidity study that is not funded yet through Johns Hopkins, and this study actually is flipping a airline study that the airlines funded, saying, why should babies didn't need a car seat? And they proved that over a 10-year period, that more babies would survive if they flew to their destinations versus drive. And so we've been asked to do that same exact study and prove that more wheelchair users would survive over a 10-year period if wheelchair users had that opportunity to fly in a wheelchair spot versus drive to their destination. So, and those are just some of the projects that we're working on. So if you're interested, taking a deep dive into accessible air travel, you can definitely reach out at contact@allwheelsup.org, and we've got a ton of projects.
Awesome. Well, we have a few more minutes if anyone else wants to drop a question in the Q&A. Or like Michelle said, you can always contact them. I'll be sending out all of the links in the chat box and the recording of this presentation in an email after the event, so that you can keep in touch and get involved. Is there anything else you guys want to add?
Let me just share my screen again and have that QR code pulled up. It is on our website as well, but just if any of you have your phones handy with you and want to scan this QR code, and it's already pre-filled out. So I'll just set it here, and then if there's any more questions.
And Gloria has a question. It says, what ideas have been proposed in the event if there was an emergency during the flight? So this is where we've proposed the Adaps evacuation sling to be added to every emergency kit on airplanes. So for example, in a single aisle airplane, there's 3 emergency kits. And we've stressed this to the airlines and Congress, that we feel that this is the way to evacuate people with reduced mobility, people who use wheelchairs, or even the elderly. Today, there's currently no device on the airplanes to help or assist, say it's the flight attendant or family members, to get someone off of the airplane.
And I know, do you want to talk about the sling that you are providing for people?
Yes, thank you. I think we talked a little bit about it earlier, but All Wheels Up has a program called the Fly. I'm sorry, I'm really dark. The sun went down here. Sorry, I look like I'm in a terrible position. Sorry. So we have a program called the Fly Safe Today program, and this is where All Wheels Up is providing for free to wheelchair users the Adaps Evacuation Sling, so they can feel safe while they're traveling. And also, if you are a wheelchair user who does not have trunk support, we are providing the adult special cares harness, which goes over the airplane seat and straps you in across the chest. And we have FAA approval for both products to mail them out to the public. And we're really excited about that. And I think there's a misconception. People always think, oh, you know, emergency landing. There's a difference between a crash landing and an emergency landing. There is one emergency landing every single day. And so whether it's smoke in the cabin or, you know, something happened with, say, the landing gear, there's an emergency landing every day. And so we want to make sure that the disability community is accounted for during these evacuations. You can currently apply at contact@allwheelsup.org. And within the next month, we will be putting a formal application on our website where you will need to indicate your disability based on the grants we're receiving. But you can, as of today, if you're going to apply tonight, you can go to contact@allwheelsup.org. Let us know that you're interested in the sling and why it's important to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that information. Kenny, do you have any last words you'd like to share before we end the event?
Well, just to try to be safe when you're out there flying. Do the best that you can to break your chair down in the meantime. I know Michelle and Brady and everybody at All Wheels Up and all the different organizations that are, you know, really pushing for change. It looks a lot different than the conversations we were having 5 and 10 years ago. So, you know, rest assured that there is progress in the works, but this machine moves slowly, as does every other machine politically and otherwise kind of affiliated. And so, yeah, there's lots of ways that you can still travel and make it accessible. But yeah, and feel free to reach out. You can just email me at kenny@hereandnowproject.org if you've got any questions for how I hack my world too. So
Awesome. I'll be sure to include your contact info on our follow-up email. And Michelle and Brady, I know you've talked a lot about lots of different things, but any last words before we wrap up for the night?
I would just say that I've said this a few times, but really, like I said, scan this QR code. It's really easy to communicate with your congressman, congresswoman, in the sense of sending a letter, and they do want to hear from constituents and they want to hear personal stories. Moving forward, that's a big thing that the study said was we want to hear from individuals with disabilities, because oftentimes we don't, because they're not traveling by air. So I think that the voice of the disability community is going to be a main driver behind this. Obviously, we have research, we have advocacy, but it's your voice that is really going to drive that.
And the only thing I can add there is, please, you know, follow All Wheels Up on our social media. As we continue to have calls to action. So a few months ago, we had, you know, posted out there, you know, to our followers to get involved on this particular ACAAA and write their congressperson. And, you know, as we start to work with Congress on improving evacuations, I'm sure we're going to have another call to action to write your congresspeople and let them know why evacuations off of airplanes is important to you and why should a new standard be created. So just keep following us on our social media. I know that Backbones has been adding it into the chats, but we always post our work on social media, and we'll keep you up to date on our progress.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Brady, Michelle, and Kenny, for sharing all of this expertise and information, and for all the work that you're doing to make airlines more accessible for people with disabilities. I'm really excited to keep following your work and get involved in what you're doing and try to push this legislation forward, because it's very important and impacts so many people. So thank you for sharing your work and for everything that you're doing. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on and learn about this important issue. Like I said, I'll be sending out all the information that has been discussed in the chat and the ways that you can get involved. I'll also be sending out a survey about this event. And if you can fill that out, that would be so helpful to help us plan future events. But yeah, thank you everyone, and we will be in touch soon.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.